Hey everybody, this is Allan Ting, TEDx speaker, #1 bestselling author, founder of Remarkable Parenting Academy. Hey, welcome to another episode of Expert Series Interview. And today's topic is about healing through understanding and the power of forgiving our parents' imperfections. Now, one of the teachers that I've been studying with is Bessel, who wrote the book, The Body Keeps a Score. And one of the things he talked about is that we have a tendency to blame our parents for their parents' screw-ups. So we blame our parents for their parents' screw-up. And it's a very profound quote because once I understood it, it's like I can stop learning to blame my parents because now we're talking about intergenerational trauma. And today we have a special guest. Her name is Anita Karadalian, and she helps women finding their own voice, fall deep in love with themselves, and create secure attachment. And I believe that you can't do that unless we, at some level, forgive our parents and also forgive ourselves. So welcome, Anita. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
By the way, she's also a transformation coach, and I met her through Tony Robbins' alumni process. And what's remarkable about her, before we dive into actually her story, is she started at a loan company. If I remember, she was doing very entry-level job, and she knows she believes herself. She can do even better. And then they won't promote her. They don't believe in her. So finally she said, enough is enough. I'm going to take charge of myself. I'm going to just go ahead and do it. And next thing you know, she's closing like $1 million of business, if I remember correctly. Started writing loans and things like that. And she really took her life by the rein and her career by the rein and be able to expel forward to who she's at today. And then she didn't stop there. Like, you know what? I really love coaching. I really love helping people out. So she's actually started coaching. And obviously, when we as coach, if you guys have been coaching in the past, you guys can relate. We also have to go through our own journey, right? So let's just go ahead and dive right in deep into it. So tell us more about, what does forgiveness mean to you, especially in the context of relationship with our parents?
So forgiveness to me in a nutshell is, I think there's a two-tier process to it. It comes with the awareness that in order, if you want a relationship to shift or to change, especially with your parents, you need to take a little bit of that ownership on yourself. And a lot of times what we find is we can easily blame. So it can be blaming the dynamic. It can be blaming the lessons that were learned or not learned, or how things have transitioned from generation to generation. But for me, what it really came down to is taking ownership of that forgiveness without asking for an apology, without asking for them to do the work, and understanding that you have to take the bull by the horns sometimes and take the work on yourself. So forgiveness to me is just really learning to accept yourself and accept those around you, and understanding how that dynamic is key if you want to grow in other areas of life.
I know, just dropped a major golden wisdom there, right? Because about forgiveness, you're like, yeah, whatever, forgiveness. I'm still really upset at my parents, right? That could happen. And I'd say it can be a lifelong learning, a lifelong journey as part through this forgiveness. And the other important, as you're talking about this, I remind myself is that why forgiveness is also really important, because Tony Robbins always says, when we start blaming others, because forgiveness, if you think about it, it's the opposite side of blaming, right? So blaming versus forgiving. So when we start blaming others, we immediately let go of our own personal power. So there's internal power and there's external power. So when we start blaming others, like we're blaming our parents, we blame the economy, we blame the president, whatever, we lose that power because we are no longer in control. So if you guys listening in, she just dropped a golden wisdom of nugget there. So forgiveness, right? So it's simply as easy as it goes over your head. This is something very profound, and it's a lot easier said than done, right? Tell us more. So can you share a personal story of transformation where forgiveness played a key role in healing your part of parent-child relationship?
Absolutely. So for me, I have amazing parents, both of which are immigrants. Both of them had their own baggage that they came to the United States with. But for me, the parent I had to really work on forgiving was my father, who happened to not be in my life from the ages of pretty much birth. And then we would have sprinkles in between, but he was not a consistent figure in my life. So I had a pretty much non-existent relationship with him. And then I hit about 21, which most people at that point are already in that phase of life where they don't feel like they need their parents. They're making their own trajectories for themselves. And a part of me was like, I don't need you to parent me anymore. But I hit this kind of curve in realizing that all the things that I wanted stemmed from having more self-worth, having more of a higher opinion of my own self, and a lot of this tie and these stories that we make, which comes to the beliefs that we end up adding to our own selves, comes through that relationships that we have. So I had a wonderful relationship with my mom, a pretty much non-existent relationship with my dad, and I made it into this full story about abandonment. And I I knew going forward, if I want to get into a relationship, if I want to have higher success in money, these are all things that abandonment wound is going to latch on and almost prevent me from having the success I wanted. So I contacted him, not really expecting anything, and it just started off with a conversation, and I went into it with a very open mind that I was going to hear him out rather than allowing myself to, because we all have our images of what the stories are. And so I was in my mind having the story of what went down on his end without actually having discussed it with him. So for me, it was kind of a multi-step process, starting off with, I want to hear you out. I'm going to take ownership and just listen to you. I'm not going to assign blame. And that part of the piece was the hardest for me, because it's very easy when you're growing up without a father figure in the home to blame all your life's issues on your father. So I heard him out, I heard his stories, and then I had to really take that time. And eventually it got to the point where we agreed to have a pretty much a relationship. So we see each other, we call each other. It's more of a give and take now, rather than this constant feeling of having the back and forth of like, I'm just gonna blame you, I don't need you, blah, blah, blah. So for me, I ended up really understanding that I needed to forgive. And it was a multi-layered journey of kind of ripping off a band-aid, give you the metaphor of, because the deeper I was getting into that relationship, the more triggers I was having of areas that had not worked on, areas I had not looked at, and then just different realizations of how it was to have this dynamic. And so eventually I realized, hey, it's not enough to just be on a communicative level. If I really truly want to have a relationship with him, I have to let go of the abandonment story, and I have to let go of the things he's done, the things he has not done, the ways he's has not showed up, and I have to take ownership if I want to improve the relationship, because he was already past his 60s at this time. So the reality was, he was not likely to change who he was at his core. And I'm not saying he's not doing the work, but at the end of the day, he's not going to change who he is. And if I want this relationship to work, I have to take that ownership. I'm young. I'm the one who has to go ahead and kind of take the bull by the horns and work on the forgiveness aspect for myself. So through different processes, Ho'oponopono, just honestly doing different work around the coaching aspects, I was able to tear down these kind of bolts, is the way I would put it, of different beliefs. And finally, I got to a place where I could actually feel that the things that would have, should have triggered me became neutral. And once I was at neutral, I realized I was healed.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It takes a lot of courage, a lot of vulnerability to share what you just shared. A lot of people wouldn't be able to be this open. So what that also tells me that you've done a lot of work, a lot of integration through this process, and now you're able to talk about it. For a lot of people, they're still stuck in that, what we call crazy eight, the anger, the sadness, the anger and the sadness, the infinite goes back and forth. They still get really upset. And the moment we start talking about these type of traumas, they get triggered, like what you said, and they go back into that old trauma itself. So just by you talking about, so we can audience take a moment of appreciation to having you sharing your vulnerability and your courage to step up and talk about this. The second thing is you start talking about the stories and the triggers. Before we talk about healing, can you share with us in the past, what were some of your stories, if that's okay with you, so that we can learn through this process of transformation? Oh, by the way, the other thing I want to mention is that the guest that I bring on is such very high caliber. I'm not looking for people who haven't done it, who speaks a good game about it, and then they actually haven't done the work. I'm actually working with people just like regular you and me that we meet on the street, have gone through the transformation itself, have gone through the trauma, actually gone through the transformation themselves. This is why I believe that our talk is so beautiful today. And again, we're super excited to have you on the show. Anyhow, before I digress, if it's okay with you, share with us some of the stories and the triggers that you had in the past, what you believe, what your father, had done, and then maybe share us with the story, like when you actually finally spoke with your father, what was the truth?
So going back, there was just this impression, because of the way the relationship was left, and that's not my story to tell, but I had assumptions that were completely incorrect, and I came up with these variations of this story. But one thing that I can really commend my mom for is whenever I would ask questions, was her response about who he was, not how he was that that he was a very good man. Things just didn't work out. And when you're 5 or you're 8, understanding the context of, okay, he's a good man, but where is he, does not really balance. So I had, without her own even adding to the narrative, and I'm sure it would have been much worse had she been feeding me typical range of your dad's an asshole or whatever, use the language. I had already made this narrative of he's a bad guy, he doesn't know how to protect the family, he's weak in some senses. I had all these different stories, and then I also had kind of this preventive off-putting. So even if I was seeing him before the age of 21, it was very much this high horse of like, that's really it. That is the person. I don't understand how you two ended up together. Would have been the train of thought I had. And I realized, because I hadn't known his own story, right? Because I didn't know that he came to the States at 21, or how his journey kind of unfolded to who he became. I made up this version of himself that was much worse than who he actually is. So by also opening up that window to at least have a relationship and an actual flow of communication with him, I was able to start making that judgment for myself. So that was one trigger. Another trigger I had was just every now and then there would be times that we would maybe need help, need some resources, and my mom was not asking him for child support. And so if he would have, on the off chance he said no, I would make it into a very big story about how he's an a-hole who doesn't support his kid and blah. And I realized I was not really necessarily thinking of all the things that he had on his plate and necessarily where he might have been at that point in his life, because I didn't know the day-to-days of what his life looked like. Again, it's very easy to assume, but we all have our tough days. So it was very much this diagnosis of, I'm just gonna claim that you have this or you are this way without knowing it for a fact. And then lastly, I could definitely say when we did start to communicate and we were already having a relationship, it would be the very little things that would throw me off, like saying you're gonna call me at a certain time and then not doing it. And I would create this story of, okay, he's going back to his old ways, he's not gonna call me, or he's not gonna do what he said he's going to do at this time or at this point. And I realized, A, things come up, and then B, from there I had realized how easy it was for me to just look at him as someone as who I could not rely on, because I was allowing that story of I've never been able to depend on you to carry out. And based off of those thoughts, and then kind of probably the way I was also communicating back with him, because I do take ownership of how I was being in that relationship, I would start to kind of send him these emails or these texts communicating how I was feeling. And while they were very valid feelings, it was very much one-sided, not looking at the whole situation for a whole and not giving him a chance to explain.
Until then, live purposely, love passionately, and be the most remarkable parent that you can be. We'll see you in future episodes.